The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
So I am live, I guess. Little problem with my earphones today, but that's okay. As long as you can hear me, I'll be just fine. Welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. On today's program, we've got a fair bit of feedback if we get some time. We've got a lot that we've once again packed into this first segment. Here in the UK, big news all day yesterday and last night. Looks like the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are basically quitting their jobs. The headlines, Meg exit, some are saying. This is the latest news from the royal family. Another huge and shameful story. The Queen is said to be devastated by this news. And Harry and Meghan, as far as we can tell, didn't really even consult with anybody. They just made this decision. And some of the commentators here have pointed out just how self-serving this move is. Richard was summarizing for us, saying that the two are going to be giving up a small portion of their money. That's what it amounts to. They just don't want, they still have the massive house, the wealth, everything that they could ever dream of, but they just don't want the responsibility. It's like they just don't want to be members of the family. They want a divorce. So last month it was Prince Andrew disgracing himself, bringing shame on the royal family. And then this month it's this. And I tell you what, you keep seeing these headlines and you need the trumpet to make sense of it all. You need the trumpet to read tomorrow's news today. We've got a montage for you later, which highlights just how much of the news is fake, sensationalism, irrational even. The trumpet will take you right through all of that noise to the truth. To the truth, and you get it ahead of time. I'll refer you to the article back in September of 2017, The Fall of the British Royal Family. That's now 2.5 years old, that article. The Fall of the British Royal Family. And in that, we referred to a 2017 Newsweek article. You'll remember the article. It was set up by this reporter that traveled around with Harry. I think this was before his marriage. For months. And the reporter got all these insights into the thinking of Prince Harry and how that he just wanted to live a normal life. How that he wanted to be something other than Prince Harry. So should we be surprised at the news of yesterday? Not if you're reading the trumpet. You're way ahead of the curve if you're reading the trumpet. This was from that Newsweek piece we quoted. Harry's determination to be ordinary seems reflected in his love life. His girlfriend, Meghan Markle, now, of course, they're married. Meghan Markle might be a well-known actress, but she's also a divorcee, a vocal feminist, an American, none of which conforms to the stereotype of a royal consort. He went against the norms, and now look at what's happened. Piers Morgan, he had a tweet last night or this morning. He said this: people say I'm too critical of Meghan Markle, but she ditched her family, ditched her dad, ditched most of her old friends, split Harry from William, and has now split him from the royal family. I rest my case, says Piers. I rest my case. Look at what she's done to the family, to the royal family. The Spectator, we've given you this quote before. This is from May of 2017. The younger royals are just too interested in the cringe-inducing world of celebrity and in the popularization of their own image. We are told that they're reinventing the concept of monarchy for the digital age and so on. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea. It says in 30 years' time, royal historians might look back at the Heads Together campaign. This was the push for mental health that William was involved in. But royal historians might look back on this at the eager association with pop stars and the blooming romance between Prince Harry and Miss Markle and ask, was this the moment when it all started to go wrong? Well, yes, indeed. It is the moment. In fact, to be more precise, it was in January of 2017 when, as my father wrote in The New Throne of David, that the royal family of Britain was displaced as the royal family of David's throne. And then my father said this, and how about this for reading tomorrow's news today? My father said that was a signal of terrible things to come upon Britain, as well as a sharp decline of America and Judah. That was a signal. Moving the throne, January 2017. Like I said, just a month ago, when we were discussing Prince Andrew and his dreadful interview, we told you that some commentators were talking about this being the worst crisis for the monarchy since the succession crisis back in 1936. That was Prince Andrew, his debacle, his connections with Jeffrey Epstein and such. And then now you have Prince Harry and Meghan Markle yesterday say, you know what? We quit. We want to move on. We want the wealth. Don't get us wrong. We want all the wealth. But we don't want the responsibility that comes with being a British royal. That's all over the news here. And of course, the Iranian standoff, that's still dominating headlines around the world, and in particular in the United States. There's actually, we just touched on it yesterday, there's actually some mainstream outlets that are now asking or looking into this mysterious explosion. That jet airliner just exploded in the skies above Tehran. And as it happens, it was just 2 or 3 hours after those missile strikes. Well, they weren't really missile strikes. It was more like a small fireworks display. In any event, the New York Magazine, it says the first accepted the explanation, or the first accepted explanation given by Iranian authorities, that the 3-year-old 737, which had taken off minutes before, had suffered engine failure. That's what they said initially. Within seconds, basically. They knew exactly what happened. No investigation needed. Then Iran announced yesterday that they weren't going to turn over the black box, which had a lot of people wondering, well, why not? Why not? If it was just a simple malfunction. All these other mysterious events of the day, it catching fire in the middle of the air and then crashing. The plane, the supplier said the plane was pretty much new and the crew was very well experienced. Well, something fishy. These 2 articles. There's one in the New York Magazine and the New York Times, and some are suggesting, I can't remember which article suggested this as well, but they're suggesting that it could have been the fact that the Iranians were just on edge, waiting for U.S. retaliation, and that they mistook this jet, this plane, as an American missile. That hardly got any news coverage yesterday morning, as everyone was talking about the missiles that were launched in the beginning of World War III. That's the way that it was presented. The news coverage, by the way, and I'll focus here mainly on the American news. the Democrat media complex. It's just been atrocious these past 7 days or so. You keep coming to a point where you realize, okay, this certainly must be a new low for the U.S. media. And then something like this happens. You have the embassy attack last week, and either those are downplayed or they say, well, this is Trump's Benghazi, which is another way, by the way, of admitting that Benghazi was an absolute disaster for Obama, for Hillary Clinton, for Susan Rice, and all in that administration. But then just a couple of days after the coverage, or lack thereof, of the attack, that's what it was, the attack on America's embassy. Then the United States bombed the Suleimani convoy. And everyone erupted in outrage. What an escalation this was. That was the word for the week. Escalation. 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 And then incredibly, the media worked to turn Suleimani into this heroic officer, beloved by ordinary Iranians. Everybody loved him. He was a real gentleman, a poet, a scholar. And then the funeral procession, live coverage, as I said yesterday. Live coverage, and these American journalists just moved almost to tears with emotion. And the tight shots of the Ayatollah, he too moved to tears. And then you had Iran's retaliation, firing a couple dozen missiles into the sand in Iraq. Missiles that they warned us about in advance. They want no part of a hot war with the United States. We now know this. But 36 hours ago, we were being told that the hot war had started. We were being told that World War III had begun. And then we come to President Trump's speech yesterday. How dare he criticize Barack Obama? How dare he single out President Obama for having funded those missiles that Iran fired at those U.S. bases in Iraq? We've put together a montage here of some of the media lowlights from the past week. Here you are.
We are in a really precarious situation because it's our president then who is being the provocative person. But Iran is the one that's showing the restraint.
We're only here at this moment, this very dangerous moment, because of Donald Trump's impulses.
This could have been a massive catastrophe of proportions that we just can't fully appreciate.
We must work with our allies to try to stop him from bringing us to the brink of war.
And I don't think you're an assassin. Okay. Anyway, thank you so much. This president is. Anyway, thank you.
We have a dangerous president. We don't know exactly why he did this.
But that doesn't seem to matter to Donald Trump. He doesn't seem to care about international law. But the fact that he is saying that we will do this, that is a black eye for the United States. That is reducing us to the level of the Taliban.
A volatile and erratic American president.
We're moving into the consequences stages of having an inept, selfish, boorish, incompetent president of the United States, and blood will be spilled, American blood, because of it.
So once you're in the business of assassination.
As to why the president ordered this provocative strike now.
So my 20-month-old who still wears diapers has better impulse control than this president.
But if you go looking for somebody in his house or his apartment, you go searching for a guy you think robbed some banks and you kill him in his apartment, that's a murder.
But that's nothing compared to the murder or the assassination of General Soleimani.
It would be the Iranians who are signaling that they want to de-escalate, that they are being rational. And it is the president of the United States that everybody's watching to see whether or not there's going to be unpredictability, whether or not there's going to be any kind of irrationality in the way.
President Trump recklessly assassinated Qassem Suleimani.
And of course, Americans are less safe today than they were before Qassem Suleimani was killed.
Against the law.
He was a commanding general of a sovereign foreign nation, and we executed him. So I don't think you can call it anything other than an assassination. It's
a revered figure in Iran and some other places in the Middle East.
Smart, charismatic, ruthless, strategic, and bold.
Gives you a little insight into the kind of hero that this man was in Iran.
You can see what it looks like. They are moving his body right now. It is just an absolutely incredible thing to be witnessing.
It's an incredibly powerful moment for the country and, frankly, for the region.
Soleimani was in charge of spreading Iranian influence around the world, and he was extremely good at it.
By killing Qassem Suleimani, the U.S. has stripped Iran of an inspirational military leader.
It's difficult to convey how revered he is in Iran. Imagine the French Foreign Legion at the height of the French Empire.
There's just a sampling of some of the news the past 7-8 days. Treasonous, really. So much contempt and hatred for the presidency and for America, and love for a terrorist state. It's just exactly the opposite of what you would expect in just a normal setting. They think the president is boorish and irrational, and they think the Iranian leaders are coming off as rational and seekers of peace. They call President Trump an assassin and a murderer, and then they can't even bring themselves to call Soleimani a terrorist. Over here in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn was asked multiple times, is he a terrorist? Is he a terrorist? They can't bring themselves to admit it. Listen to Bret Baier from last night on Fox, and he's a pretty level-headed reporter, and he's talking about the derangement that has set in. Clip 12.
There is this sense that this president perhaps doesn't get credit when something goes right. Originally, as this all was happening, it was going to be World War III. He's starting World War III, and there's no strategy here. Now, we saw what Iran did in response. We see what the U.S. is saying in response to that. And you wonder whether Trump derangement syndrome factors in to some of the responses you hear publicly here in Washington.
You wonder if that's what's motivating it. That's the way they see all news. They follow right in the steps of the previous administration, and as I've been saying, they're all out on TV as well. Ben Rhodes, and in this case, Susan Rice. This is what she said, I think, on MSNBC last night, clip 13.
We are the ones that have precipitated this cycle of escalation, unfortunately, and we treat our allies under President Trump like trash.
We've caused the escalation here. I like how that the history for them begins last Friday. It's as if Middle East history started on Friday, what was that, January 4th, 2020. 2020. That's where it all began. It started, Middle East history began with this unhinged, provocative, murderous act of Donald J. Trump. Before that, everything was peaceful. Everything was tranquil. And then they go back and revise the history from the 8 years of Antiochus. And you look at what that administration was doing to many of its allies, like Egypt and Israel. It turned Libya into a terrorist hotbed. Just turned that nation right on its head. It threw ordinary Syrians to the wolves. All those cases of spying, not helping Ukraine, appeasing Russia, letting Russia just march into Crimea. And then, of course, the JCPOA giving Iran tens of billions of dollars. Oh, well, we have to say they unfroze those assets. Otherwise, you're lying. If you as the president get up and say they got all this money from Obama, then they're going to rush and say, well, now hang on. He didn't literally give it to them. He didn't take $150 billion out of his wallet and give it to the mullahs. There's their focus. There's got to be a lie in there somewhere. And then the Obama people, they come off clean because history for them started just last week. Listen to this mind-boggling quote. This is a Democrat from California talking about the Obama years. His name is Representative Ro Khanna, clip 14.
This was not just Barack Obama, but the reporting I've seen says that President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney also passed on the chance to take out Soleimani. And the reason they all passed is they did not want to escalate a war with Iran. And I believe the President Obama had a strategy of the JCPOA that would prevent Iran from becoming nuclear. And there weren't these incidents during the Obama administration. We didn't have protests against our embassies. We didn't have the killing of American contractors. So Americans were safe at that time.
No protests during the Obama years. No protests around embassies. There were no American contractors killed during those 8 years. Did you know that? This is Wikipedia says this guy's an academic, a lawyer, and a politician. I was a little shocked, frankly, that the Fox News reporters didn't push back a little bit. There were no protests? Soleimani, by the way, helped to plan the attack on Benghazi. September 11th, 2012. And Soleimani was one of the architects. That resulted in a U.S. ambassador being murdered. Now, here's a real murder. Here's a real assassination. And 3 other Americans to go with it. A sad and tragic day for the United States. A shameful day. There were all the other, the protests around the Cairo embassy, I remember. All of the prisoners that we traded millions and millions of dollars for. I read a couple of articles. I suppose I'll have to get around to this book at some point, but I'm kind of dreading it. Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And these articles that I read last night, they talked about how influential that book has been. How that they have a children's version, kind of like the Time magazine for kids. It was interesting last night, speaking of teaching your children, I read this quote. I did a little bit of odds and ends, I guess, with my reading, but this was over in Andrew Roberts' book on Churchill. I wish I brought it with me. But he wrote to his wife, and actually, no, he wrote the letter to his son, Randolph, who was 4 at the time. And he said something to the effect that, we're over here fighting back, trying to kill Germans because they're very bad people that have disrupted the peace in Europe. He just gave it to his son straight. Here's what we're doing. And the son was 4. Here's what we're doing. It's a righteous cause. These are the bad guys. But you can't do that today. In fact, it's worse than that. Howard Zinn takes it and flips it and says that the bad guys are good and the good guys are evil. Now, we're all evil. As we've covered before on this program, we just covered it recently. The heart of man, deceitful and wicked. And we need God to heal us. But these journalists have been educated to believe that everything bad in this world has been caused by the United States of America. That's the lens through which they view the world, which is why they can't get to the truth. Proverbs 1:29, it says, for that they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the eternal. They just hate the truth. They hate knowledge. And of course, a better known verse talks about our people being destroyed for lack of knowledge. That's Hosea 4 and verse 6. Ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, Paul said. That's 2 Timothy 3 and verse 7. Always learning. You can read through, I checked this morning, the Zen book is almost 700 pages. Starts out with Columbus. He was a genocidal maniac. And then there you go. You're off and running. Columbus was evil. The Indians were peace-loving. They didn't have weapons. They came up and hugged you as soon as you arrived on shore. That's how the book starts. So you can get a good idea of where it goes from there. This is a book that's been around since 1980. And there's still activist groups that are out there pushing for this to be taught in high school, for this to be taught to 8th graders. And we've got to get the young people's version. We got to get it to them as young as possible. And they're not going to be hearing about Europe or World War II. It's not going to be described to them like what Winston Churchill wrote to his 4-year-old boy back in the 1916, I guess it was. Look at how far removed we are from the truth. Howard Zinn, in his book, he says there's no such thing as a pure fact. It's all a matter of interpretation. That's Howard Zinn from a book he wrote in 1980. Satan was setting the stage. And now we're, almost 2 generations on from that. And our children are taught these things. These are the educators of today. These are the commentators. These are the journalists. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, you can predict exactly the position that nothing about the past week really should surprise us. I mean, it is surprising and shocking to see them raving about this guy that murdered so many Americans. And then they make Donald Trump out to be the murderer, as you heard on that montage. Twisted and perverted. Well, President Trump came out yesterday with his much anticipated 9-minute statement. And for 9 minutes, he spoke with a fair bit of clarity. It was refreshing to hear a president speak the truth, for the most part. Here's what he said about the Iranian regime, clip 1.
For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world.
Now, as we've discussed this week, this is President Trump trying to reestablish deterrence. He's, after a decade of appeasement, this is the challenge that's before him. And he's starting on this premise. Look, your history, it speaks for itself. You've been a destructive and destabilizing force in the Middle East. And you've got to stop. You've got to stop with this. He spoke at length on Soleimani's history with terrorism. Clip 2.
Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago.
And that's something that people don't like to hear, people in the Democrat media complex. He should have been terminated long ago. You want to talk about previous administrations? All of them took a pass on that bold, courageous act. Well, he explained in this statement that America would still be imposing sanctions, even adding to them. And he said further, clip 3.
Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration.
And that's what had most of the media last night enraged, that he would single out the Obama administration. At the National Review this morning, it says, few things irritate media fact-checkers more than President Trump's accusation that Obama helped fund the Iranian regime and its terror apparatus, probably because it's completely true. It's completely true. Of course he helped to fund it. He sent pallets of cash to them. We know that they increased their military budget by 90% the very first year after the JCPOA. Of course it helped their military efforts, their terrorist network around the world. And yet the media yesterday, they rushed to the microphone to say, how dare he say that? Listen to what the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, admitted. This was, I think, just a couple years ago. This was when he was in, I think, Switzerland for a conference, clip 7.
Do you believe that any of that $55 billion ends up in the hands of terrorists?
I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or of other entities, some of which are labeled terrorist. To some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented.
And good for him for at least telling the truth. A lot more went to these terrorist groups than he's letting on there. But at least he admitted that some would go to the terrorist groups. Ben Shapiro, in an article he wrote yesterday, he referred to a statement by the U.S. Central Command Army General Joseph Votel. This was an Obama guy. He said that Iran had become more aggressive since the nuclear deal. They had become more aggressive, not less, more. So they come on camera, they say everything was peaceful, nothing happened. There were no protests. There were no attacks on embassies. There were no attacks on Americans. They lie to the camera, straight up lie. They look right into the camera and they say, this is the way it was during our wonderful administration. And now President Trump's come along and upset everything. He killed Suleimani. That's going to escalate the tensions. That's going to start a world war. We're at the first stage of a hot war. This piece at National Review, it says, let's remember, until the Wall Street Journal reported that the administration had secretly airlifted $400 million in ransom payments for 4 Americans detained in Tehran. This was during Obama's years. 7 months after the fact, they got around to reporting it 7 months after. Not that it's the Wall Street Journal's fault. This is the Obama administration covering it up. They did all of this secretively, covertly. They lied to get the deal done, and then they did pay them off. They bribed them. It says, and Obama never offered any legal justification or accounting for the billions he transferred. Nor did Obama ever explain the fiscal calculation of tacking on an extra $1.3 billion in interest payments. So $1.7 or $8 billion. And then you had the removal of the freeze that was on whatever it was, 50 to 150 billion. Reporters like to point out that 150 billion, the amount Trump likes to claim Obama transferred to the Iranians, is almost surely the high-end estimate, or likely an exaggeration. But we don't know for sure because institutional media didn't mobilize its considerable resources to find out. The media doesn't care. They don't care to know. They just say it's an exaggeration, so that's a lie, so that can be added to the Washington Post tracker of all the lies of President Trump. And then he said it again yesterday. He just keeps repeating the lie. It says here, but we don't know for sure because well, I read that. If reporters had spent as much time talking about the ransom payments or the 600 soldiers murdered by Iran as they do fact-checking Trump's ransom assertions, the public would be a lot better informed. You see, we'd know a lot more about what actually happened. We'd know the facts. But you see, Howard Zinn, he says there's no such thing as a pure fact. It's all a matter of interpretation. And the way they interpret this, Donald Trump's lying, and he's done it repeatedly. And President Obama didn't pay them off. No, never happened. Embassies coming under attack? No, never happened. Not under Obama's watch. U.S. contractors killed? That only happens in the age of Trump, we're told. In the speech he gave yesterday, or the statement, that we're coming to the real significant statement, because this just aligns it perfectly with what we've been talking about all week. Here's the president urging the nations of Europe now to get out of the JCPOA, and really, European nations are in a pretty difficult spot. Because before this week, they could say, well, Iran is complying, so we'll go ahead and stay with it even if the U.S. pulls out. But this week, amid all the tensions, Iran said, that's it, it's over. We're pulling out, or at least we're gonna end a good bit of the requirements that were put upon us. So now what are the European nations going to do? If Iran is there saying, we're not going to comply, what's Germany going to do? What's Britain going to do? What's France going to do? Well, here's the President of the United States urging them to follow America's lead. Clip 4.
The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place.
So it's pretty interesting there. He's urging even Russia and China. We've all got to get on board with this. And then he talks there at the end about making a deal. He wants a deal. He doesn't want the JCPOA, but he wants a deal, and a deal most notably that will get the United States out of Iraq, out of Syria. Listen to this one from yesterday, clip 5.
Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process.
He wants Europe, in other words, to be a lot more involved. He went on to say that, hey, we don't need the Middle East oil. And we've read from these articles this week, Victor Davis Hanson, Lee Smith. And now here's the president basically saying, look, we're the number one energy producer in the world. We don't need the Middle East. We don't need the Middle East as much as Europe does. So the stage is being set for the United States to hand over the Middle East to Europe. This is the President of the United States saying to European leaders, it's yours. Well, in a way, he's also saying to Iran, I think indirectly, that, look, if we get a good exit strategy, if you make a deal with us and you stop threatening American lives, then we'll give you Iraq. We don't want it. And quite a few of the Iraqi members of parliament don't want Americans to be there either. That was kind of a sham vote earlier in the week anyway. The Kurds and the Sunnis weren't there in attendance. In any event, a nice little slap in the face from the Shiites in the Iraqi parliament. We don't want the United States here. They want to be overrun by Soleimani's forces. They want the mullahs to have total control. You see how so many prophecies are just lining up perfectly. We know from Psalm 83 that Germany is going to be the one coordinating and bringing together this alliance, this anti-Iran alliance. We know from Daniel 11 that Germany is going to come against the king of the south, or radical Islam, like a whirlwind, and crush the king of the south. And we know from Daniel 11 that the United States is not mentioned in that prophecy. One final quote from the statement yesterday, clip 6.
Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. The destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities.
Does that sound like a president who wants to go to war against Iran? Does that sound like a president who's itching for a hot war? Every statement he's ever made suggests he wants to get out of there. He doesn't even want to be a part of the Middle East mess. I mean, there he was asking for Iran's help. Look, let's just focus on making sure there's no remnants of ISIS left. And then, by implication, he's saying, then you can have it. We don't want it. Last night on Tucker Carlson's show, he had a retired Army colonel, Douglas McGregor. Another one of many. You're starting to hear them all over the place in conservative media, calling for this president to just get out, to take this as an opportunity to go home. Listen to what the retired Army colonel had to say, clip 8.
The president made a right decision not to respond. Now he needs to live up to the promises that he made to the American people and pull us out of both Syria and Iraq. That war is over. We lost it. Iran is a winner for the moment.
The war is over, he says. We lost. We lost. Look at all this money and this blood we spilled. The money we spent, our strength spent in vain. Those are the prophecies. We don't have the will to see it through to the end. That's what we said at the Trumpet. You talk about tomorrow's news today. We were writing in 2003. We were writing in 2002. We were writing right after 9/11. Okay, we've got a war against terrorism. Well, it's not against a nation. It's kind of just against this shadowy network. Do we have the will to see it through to the end? Do we have the will to go after the head of the snake? Which we identified back in the early 2000s as Iran. In fact, we identified Iran as the king of the South in the mid-1990s. Tomorrow's news today. He says, we lost. The war's over, we lost, and Iran is the winner. Now, he says it's the winner for the moment because he sees it competing with the Turks, competing with the Sunni Islamists, and I suppose the Kurds to some extent. It's just a tangled mess. So why even be there? Well, this is fascinating to zero in on because as we've been covering this week, we're beginning to see the Psalm 83 prophecy come into focus. This was Tucker Carlson responding to the colonel's comment, clip 9.
So you're saying that if we want to impede the growth of Iran's influence in the region, hand them Iraq and wish them luck.
Just hand it over to them and say, good luck with it. It's all yours. We don't want it. Now, as I say, this colonel doesn't think that Iran would dominate Iraq for very long because the Sunnis there hate him, and as I say, the Kurds would resist it as well. Erdogan in Turkey has his designs on northern Iraq. But what he doesn't understand is that it's prophesied. Iran will take over Iraq in the end and lose Syria and lose Lebanon. And isn't that interesting? Here again, you look at Turkey. We're going to have to keep our eyes on Turkey because, like this colonel brings out, they're looking at Syria and saying, we want to be the dominant force in that nation. And as Syria goes, I'm sure Lebanon's going to go right along with it. This is another one from the Colonel McGregor, clip 10.
Let's get out, leave it alone, let the people there sort it out. And they will.
Well, they won't. Let them sort it out is the mentality driving this, though. But God has something to say with how all of this is going to come into alignment. You have the pro-Iranian forces or nations or groups, and then you have the anti-Iranian alliance headed up by Germany. One final clip here from this Colonel McGregor, clip 11.
Well, the president can do it. He has a wonderful opportunity now. He has a new point of departure. He can take the clean sheet and put it on the table, and he can sit with the Iranians and say, look, what are your interests? Tell us. We'll tell you what ours are. And he can draw that line that I mentioned. That can become the Trump line. And that's how great powers sort things out.
Isn't it astounding how far we've come and what has happened to reach this point? Following 9/11, President Bush identified Iran as the axis of evil, one of them, one of the three. We were talking about it as the head of the snake, and unless you went after the head, the terrorism would just continue for years and years and years. And now we've been in Iraq for 17 years. The war is over. You lost, says this colonel. America lost. Iran won. So let's just sit down at the negotiating table and hand it over to them. What an insight Daniel 11 and Psalm 83 gives us going forward. You've already had so many of these headlines of today written about at the Trumpet years ago. My father on the Key of David program, this goes back to May of 2012, he talks about this Psalm 83 prophecy. And this prophecy reveals that when Europe comes against the king of the south, when Daniel 11 and verse 40 happens, there's events that lead up to it. In other words, when Germany comes at Iran like a whirlwind, Germany's going to be allied with several other nations in the Middle East. Here's what my father had to say on that Psalm 83 prophecy in May of 2012, clip 15.
But Psalm 83 discusses a 10-nation confederation, and they're not going to just come together immediately after Germany defeats Iran. It takes time to build a confederation like that, so it's happening now. And I mean happening very, very fast, and we need to watch what's happening with Germany in the Middle East and Europe.
It takes time for a confederation like this to develop, and we're seeing it happen in stages, and we're at a pretty significant stage with respect to this. Now, President Trump didn't come out and announce yesterday, that's it, we're out, we're going home. But there was that letter from one of those generals or officers in the Army that was released, and apparently it was a draft. This statement from the U.S. military, that we're leaving Iraq, and that caused a big dust up earlier in the week. And then the U.S. apologized, saying it was just meant to be a draft. It's not happening. We're not leaving right now. But be assured that is coming. That is coming. This prophecy in Psalm 83, it says, "For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against you, the tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites." So it lists all these peoples here. Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. So my father in that Key of David program back in 2012, he explained the identity, the modern day identity of these peoples listed off, this confederation aligned against the king of the south, against Iran, this German-led Middle East confederation. Here's my father's explanation, clip 16.
So here are the modern names of these nations as we're taught at Ambassador College under Herbert W. Armstrong, and a lot of research had gone into this. But Edom is Turkey, and the Ishmaelites, Saudi Arabia, Moab, Jordan. Hagarenes anciently dwelt in the land known as Syria today, and Gebel, Lebanon. Ammon is Jordan. Asher is Germany. Now, you need our booklet on the Holy Roman Empire to understand this, but Germany is the power behind all this. And in principle, this is how Germany started World War I and World War II. The same old modus operandi, and they haven't gotten away from it after all these years, and we have been trying to tell the world that for such a long time. The Hagarenes, Syria, every indication is it's Syria, and at this time it's closely allied with Iran, but they're about to have a break with Iran, and it's going to have some domino effects on other nations, which is going to really shake this world and change the course of world events in a way that hasn't happened in quite a long time.
That's from 2012. And the world, particularly the Middle Eastern region, it's shaking. It's shaking right now. He talked there at the end about Syria, right at the start of the Syrian civil war. You can go back to the Trumpet website. Here again, tomorrow's news. Today, you get the headlines in advance. My father wrote about how the Syrian crisis will end, and he said Iran is going to be pushed out of Syria. So America's about to hand over Iraq to Iran. Iran's probably going to have its hands full just with maintaining control over Iraq. I think that colonel is somewhat right along those lines. He's off, though, in thinking that Iran's going to lose control of Iraq. They're going to gain control of Iraq, but lose control of Syria. This is what your Bible prophesies, and it's based on Psalm 83. It's based on Daniel 11. You see the two camps if you put those two passages together. How important is it for you to be an avid reader of the Trumpet magazine or the Trumpet website? In a world where there's so much fake news, so much hysterical reactions to news events, where people really reporting on it, they really hate the truth. There's no such thing as facts. It's just all about the narrative. It's all about an agenda. It's all about fake news based on fake history. With the Trumpet, you get tomorrow's news today because it's grounded in the prophecies of God. And all through the Bible, God says, I am the light. I'll bring light to your path. I am the truth. The Word of God is truth. We just have to have the hunger for that truth. We have to seek after it, like the Proverbs say. We have to seek after it like we would gold and silver. And then when we receive it, hold on to it. Prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. Well, we will reserve some time tomorrow for some listener feedback. There's one letter in particular. I got a long email from one of our Australian listeners whose house was very nearly devoured by those raging fires. And it's a lengthy email. I don't know how much I'll be able to go through all of it. But it's a powerful, powerful story to relate to you listeners. An amazing story of faith as well. And God's mighty hand, clearly, his mighty hand was involved in sparing that man, his family, and their home, as well as other properties even next to them. So hopefully we'll get into that on tomorrow's show. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow.